Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, Ole's at the wheel for the next 3 years and he's steering Manchester United in the right direction after another win, this time at home to Watford. Stop Harry Kane, that's the message from Jurgen Klopp ahead of Liverpool's clash with Tottenham at Anfield today. And what next for Huddersfield? They're the first team relegated from the Premier League this season. They lost yesterday at Crystal Palace. Well, on the winning team with us this morning, Jason Burt is the chief football correspondent at The Telegraph. Alison Rudd is a sports reporter with The Times. And John Cross is here, minus his gilet. He's the chief football writer at The Mirror. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you all. Don't forget, you can tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on screen over the next 90 minutes. Let's have a look at the papers then, dominated by this man, this contract, this story, Ole Gunnar Solskjær. A 3-year deal for him at Old Trafford. He's going to bring back the glory years. Made a good start yesterday, beating Watford at Old Trafford. The performance wasn't great, but they got the win, and that's all that matters at this stage of the season. It's really great. That's the back page of The Star this morning. The Sunday People, though, they prefer to talk about Real Madrid and Zinedine Zidane. There's a lot of love for Pogba. That's in the back page. That's on the back page of the People this morning. Also on the back page, same story on the Sunday Mirror as well. The Sun, though, it's La Gea, Paris Saint-Germain, dangling £350,000 a week for Manchester United's goalkeeper. A lot of money. Manchester United will have to fork out to keep him. The quad is on, though. Manchester City, they won yesterday, this time at Fulham. Big win for them. And Pep Guardiola talking about their hunt for the quadruple. It is the dream for Manchester City. The dream is for Huddersfield to come straight back up, relegated yesterday downtown at Crystal Palace. They lost yesterday. They're a championship club again. Sunday Telegraph, Sam Wallace picking up this story. It's Jimmy Greaves. The honour is well overdue, say his family. They've been talking to Sam Wallace this morning in The Telegraph. It's also in Sam's column in a week that saw Harry Kane pick up an MBE, the England head coach Gareth Southgate pick up an OBE. But where is Jimmy Greaves' honour? We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the programme. First of all, though, let's talk about the job that Ole Gunnar Solskjær has got now at Manchester United. Widely anticipated, Jason, but Manchester United finally confirming it in the international break. Why now? Why did they choose this moment at the end of the towards the end of the international break, to confirm his 3-year deal? And is he the right man for the job?
I think it was logical to do it now. Obviously on the back of 2 defeats as well, so to stop that kind of sense of whether or not they're actually going to give him the job. You're in a period now where you're talking about contract negotiations with players, you're talking about transfer targets, and I think he just quietens that down. We're obviously moving into a different phase from whether he's going to get the job, he's going to got the job, what happens next. And I think it's interesting because clearly he was not going to be the full-time manager when he was appointed. I don't think that anyone at Manchester United expected him to do the job he's done to the degree he's done. I think they thought he would calm it down and he would bring a better atmosphere to the club, but not to achieve the results he has done. So what they've got to do now is move away from that period of just basically let's get us back to being what we want to be, and then try and move forward now to be the club they need to be in the future. So there's an awful lot of work to be done at Manchester United, and I think key to that is partly the structure around him. I wouldn't underestimate the importance of Mike Phelan. The way it's explained to me is almost like a joint manager thing. He's so important that his decision-making in the decision-making process that he has a big say. And I don't have a problem with that at all, because obviously you've got Solskjær as the kind of main guy, the figurehead, and Phelan as the guy behind the scenes. And a big mistake was made, obviously we all know, several years ago when David Moyes got rid of Mike Phelan. That was a huge mistake, and Manchester United know that was a big mistake. So he's very important to their future, as is Michael Carrick. And then they've got to appoint a technical director. So they've got an awful lot of work still to do behind the scenes to sort things out. I think it's still a risk. I think there's a risk involved in this because whatever you say, this is a huge job for somebody like Solskjær to take on board. He's done all the right things so far, but now he's got some very hard decisions to make as well as to what happens with the future of the club, the players he wants to bring in, the players that want to go or want to stay, and we'll see lots more stories around Paul Pogba wanting to go to Real Madrid or whatever. He's got to calm that situation down as well, and then decide really what the future direction of Manchester United is. It's been a firefighting exercise so far, and now it's about sort of moving forward and being much more bold in terms of what you want to do with the club. Yeah, OK, well, they got off to a win yesterday. They ended those 2 defeats in a row that Jason just mentioned. But a lot of people have written this week, Ali, since the confirmation of the appointment, about being steeped in the history of the club, the traditions, and how important it is to retain those values. How relevant is that?
Well, it's definitely relevant. I think more relevant is the specifics of Solskjær in that he models himself on Ferguson. and he loves the man, and he does not mind him being at every match. And I think if you just accept that the greatest period of Man United Premier League history was under Ferguson, and everything he did is still, you know, so highly regarded, and the man is highly regarded. For most managers coming in at United, having Ferguson still there, part of the fabric, cameras always on his face, I think that's... for some managers, it would be intimidating. For some that aren't intimidated, it would be annoying. You need somebody who sort of transcends that normal battle of the egos, if you like. And I think the fact that Solskjær, everything he's done in his life has been either to try and please Ferguson or to mimic him and be the sort of manager he is. I know he doesn't look or speak like a Ferguson, but behind the scenes, he takes all his cues from what he learned from Ferguson as a manager. So I think in the short, it's more about the short-term tradition of that, really. I think the fact that Solskjær is prepared to say, I'm really happy for tips from him. I like him being there. I am sort of his offspring, if you like. I am the natural manager because I've learnt from the man who knew how to make Manchester United great again. So I think, in that sense, the tradition does matter, rather than trying to build a fairy tale about what the values of a Man United over the decades are. It's more about what Man United have done is struggle since Ferguson retired, and now they found a clever way of overcoming that Ferguson obstacle, I think.
Is he a clone of Fergie?
Yeah, in a way that I think he's steeped in Man United tradition, and also, indeed, what I think he's taken from Fergie. I found it a little uncomfortable, I have to say, at sometimes, at sort of various press conferences, whether it's sort of pre-match or post-match, in the way that he talks about sort of the gaffer and the boss. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying be disrespectful. I love his respect towards Man United and tradition.
You want him to call him Fergie?
And Sir Alex and Ferguson. Yeah, maybe. Just call him boss. But it's just... I just think that sooner or later he's kind of got to sort of strike out and make himself his own man, his own person. Because early in the Solskjær reign, we couldn't escape from the stories, which was basically saying, well, it wasn't Ole at the wheel, it was Sir Alex Ferguson pulling the strings. And I think subtly he's managed to manoeuvre himself away from that a little bit, so massive credit to him in the bank. But as time goes on over the course of these 3 years, I do think that more and more we'll see Solskjær moving away from that. I can't stress enough how he's completely changed the mood at Old Trafford. I mean, the whole place, when you go towards the stadium, you know, even walking to the ground from your car, everyone's smiling all of a sudden, where it was, you know, doom and gloom under Mourinho. But it's way more than just putting smiles on faces, and it's sort of patronising to even suggest that, because Solskjær, I think, has got the team well structured. He's got the team playing with a style and with a belief. He's got them playing with that Man United DNA in which they're fearless and they're strong and they're defiant. I mean, yesterday was by no means a perfect performance. He admitted himself that you can't play well every time. The one question mark for me will be with Solskjær, and I thought it was an absolute no-brainer to give him the job, is that I think other clubs, and then I wonder whether the big targets they might go for, would have been sort of more fearful of a big-name appointment, a Pochettino. That is a statement appointment. I think that Solskjær, while it isn't necessarily a statement appointment, it's the right, and it's also a clever appointment for what is needed right now, because I think he buys into the club, he knows the identity, the philosophy, bringing young players through. You watch the PSG game, which I have to say was almost a defining moment, I think, in his reign so far. The way that he introduced the young players from the bench, the way that he just went at that game relentlessly, the way that he spoke pre-match about the belief that they could go through, and indeed they did. What an amazing night that was, and that was a wonderful moment for Solskjær. But I do think the challenge begins now from the summer, basically, when he has to restructure a team. He's got major questions over Pogba and Pogba's future, what he does with that issue, how can he rebuild this team. I don't think it will take huge amounts. I think arguably maybe 3 quality players, but it's a really interesting, it's a major challenge. It's an exciting time for United and Solskjær.
Crossy mentioned the rebuild, the number of players and the changes that will need to be made. You mentioned the director of football.
Yeah.
So
technical director is going to be called.
OK, so technical director. So Fergie's already influential there, I think. OK, so Solskjær, is it Mike Phelan effectively joint manager, however, you know, OK.
That's what I believe, yeah.
OK. Michael Carrick, your endless coaching staff there. You've got the influence of Ed Woodward. Why do you need another body?
Actually, to streamline it a little bit, because I think at the moment there probably are too many voices, as you say, and I think also with recruitment in particular and first team strategy, but also how it works with the academy. They haven't got one person who's the go-to person. You say, right, it's going through him. And I don't think this technical director will be somebody who's in overall charge of recruitment. I think there will almost be a, I don't want to use the phrase transfer committee, but there will be that kind of approach, which is basically what modern clubs do. I mean, a lot of modern clubs have that kind of feel that there's 3 or 4 people in that decision-making process, not one guy who has the final say on a transfer. They'll be signed off by Woodward, but I think this person will come in and be influential in that area, but also in the pathway for younger players into the first team squad. And I think at the moment it's a little bit disparate at Manchester United. You've got an awful lot of people involved in the process. And I think Mourinho's complaint, the legitimate part of his complaint, was he didn't always know quite who to go to talk to about various issues. And I think if you streamline it a bit more, have this person, which I think might be an internal appointment, actually. I think John Murtagh at the moment might well be the favourite for that, or it may be somebody who's got a link with the club, comes in a bit more low-key, not somebody that's some big director of football, some big name to take over. And what Man United don't want, and what no club should want, is somebody to come in and tell you what you should be. Because if they don't know what they are, then they shouldn't bother being in football in the first place. So that's too much of that's been going on at Manchester United with Mourinho and Van Gaal. Too much of that's gone on before. They need somebody who's going to come in and sort of blend that together and streamline that process and be a key part of the recruitment, but also how the first team strategy and the academy and everything works together. And I think that would work in the more collegiate approach they're taking now under Solskjær.
Mm. Does this come under his job description as well? Convincing players to remain at Manchester United. It's all about the money on the back of the Sun this morning, £350,000 a week for De Gea. A little bit different, perhaps, the Mirror's story and the Sunday People this morning with Zidane talking about Pogba, saying, look, I like him, and if he ever leaves Manchester United, yeah, he's always said he wants to play for Real Madrid. The seduction process, that has already begun. How does Solskjær convince them that their future is with Manchester United?
Well, of the 2 names you've mentioned, I'd say keeping De Gea is more important than keeping Pogba, probably. Most of what United have achieved since Ferguson left has been down to having an absolutely quite superb goalkeeper who's kept them in games they should have lost. And we talk about Man United as if they've had this awful time, but they've actually managed to keep reasonably buoyant and win trophies and, OK, not challenge for the league, but they've not lost their stature as one of the biggest club in the world. They're there. But the reason they are, I think, is in fair degree down to De Gea, and I think the soap opera of him wanting to have parity on the highest earners at the club is really interesting, because why on earth wouldn't you want to give your most important player the biggest salary? So I would hope that Solskjær, as a sensible man, would find a way to convince the people who open the purse strings to give him that and make him stay. Because keeping De Gea would be like the biggest signing you could make for Manchester United. I think it's a different story altogether when it comes to someone like Pogba. And again, you hope that, because we've already seen Pogba's demeanour and performances change and improve, so clearly Solskjær gets on with him and is able to talk to him. It might be that Solskjær realises Pogba's just one of those people that can't help saying things that get big headlines, like, oh, I fancy playing for Real Madrid one day, and is you know, susceptible to being wooed by a club like Real Madrid. Solskjær has to work out if that's just his character, but he knows if he stays at Man United, he'll be completely committed to Man United and grow as a player and so on, or whether the player that's going to keep saying stuff like that and indicate that he's too important to maybe stay in Manchester, maybe he'd be better off cashing in, who thought you'd make a profit on Pogba, but you could do if you went to Real Madrid. So that's the sort of intuitive thing that I hope Solskjær, and I say I hope and think because of what he's done so far, in that he clearly knows how to talk to players. So that's how he has to navigate it. I don't think you can just say, if Pogba is sold, that means Solskjær lacks gravitas or an inability to handle big-name players. It may be the right thing to do for him not to be there.
In my mind, sorry, Jason, in my mind there's the classic Fergie masterstroke at the end of the season would be big-name player out of the door, and a reminder to the Manchester United dressing room who holds the power here. And if we really believe Solskjær is a clone of Fergie, then to establish that power and remind its players who really is in charge of this football club, that would be the thing to do. Whether that's Paul Pogba or whether that's another player, has he got that kind of power? Would he go through with a decision as big as that, a call as big as that?
Well, for Paul Pogba, you could maybe read Paul Ince, couldn't you? The governor.
Yeah.
I mean, he was, you know, it's difficult to remember sometimes just what a player Paul Ince was at Manchester United, and you sort of kind of read sort of the story in reverse about sort of Paul Ince and his departure and quite how brutal it was. And I think in the end, actually, Fergie probably regretted it, but he wanted to make that sort of statement. We shouldn't underestimate what an amazing player Pogba is, but he is a massive problem for Solskjær, in that we know that Pogba is a world-class player. He's won the World Cup. He's dynamic. He's exciting. He's got character. He's made for a club like Manchester United, in my mind. But if his heart is not really in it, that will reflect in his performances. Yes, they've been improved dramatically since Solskjær was in charge, but then he can go missing in certain games. And if he is flirting, or if other clubs are flirting with him, does that get into his mind? Is he more easily distracted than some other big names? I do think it's an issue. I think that Solskjær has to be absolutely clear at this point whether Paul Pogba really wants to stay and help drive United forward, not just for next season, but for the long term. He's got to be in it. What
was your interpretation of Zidane's comments? I know him personally. He's truly a different player. Few players can do what he can. If one day there's a possibility that he will want to leave after his experience at United, why not come to Real Madrid? What was your interpretation?
My interpretation is that is the start of a Zidane / Real Madrid attempt to try and get Paul Pogba.
And it will help us with something to write about over the summer.
Well, absolutely. In a blank, yeah, talking about, with all due respect to the Nations League, we need it for 6 weeks, if you can, please. But look, I do think we've seen this so many times, and also I think that the managers can be respectful and they can decide to politely sort of abstain from saying something that they think is completely unachievable. But Zidane there, in my mind, has taken it upon himself to say, yes, I like Paul Pogba, I would like Paul Pogba at some point in the future. And that, I think, in my mind, is done with a motive. And that motive, I think, is to try and get him, see whether he's available this summer. And I think for Paul Pogba, who, let's be honest here, has been unsettled at various points, not right now, in the recent past for Manchester United, he's probably thinking, well, is it time to leap? You know, Barcelona were flirting with me last summer, now it's Real Madrid, now it's like this godlike figure in my country's, you know, recent past in the footballing history. If he wants me, I'm probably quite tempted. Pogba would be a massive loss for United and indeed the Premier League, but only if he's at the best Paul Pogba, if you see what I mean.
It's very simple for Manchester United, I think. You offer him a new contract and see what he does. I think he's got 2 more years after this year, so this is the perfect time to do it. Test his resolve this summer. And I think Zidane will be well aware of the contract situation. If he has 2 more years of contract, I think he's got 2 more years, might be an option for another year, but if he's got 2 more years of contract, then basically Zidane may well be saying to him, well, you know, leave it another year and we'll come back for you next summer after we've done Eden Hazard this summer. Because I'm not sure Real Madrid have got the money to buy him this summer, and that's the other issue. I mean, Real Madrid have got there's an awful lot of talk about Real Madrid and all the players they're going to sign this summer, but I don't think they've got the money that everyone thinks they've got, and they'll have to move on some players as well. So it may well be they've got an awful lot of the transfer business to do. Their priority is clearly Hazard. I think Hazard will go, and I think Pogba, it could well be a sort of softening up exercise for next summer. But I think if Manchester United are smart about it, they offer him a new contract.
Yeah.
And the problem with Manchester United, as we all know, is Alexis Sanchez. They've created a massive problem for themselves. They're going to have to pay, literally, a very heavy price for having signed Alexis Sanchez on that money, because every other player in the Manchester United dressing room knows how much he's been paid, and he's not playing. Yeah. And he's been paid an awful lot more than them.
If PSG think that they could get De Gea for 350, well, I mean, Man United should surely be biting their hand off if De Gea will re-sign for that. I mean, it's just he's the best goalkeeper in the world, and I'm sure United are going places, but they need to keep De Gea, as Alison was saying.
Yeah. Big summer ahead then for Manchester United and for their new manager, Ole Gunnar Solskjær. OK, next up, we're going to talk about Manchester City. Big win for them. Another win, this time at Craven Cottage. More on that coming next. Welcome back. Alison and John were both at Craven Cottage yesterday to see Manchester City cruise to a 2-0 victory over Fulham. They're on their way down, aren't they, Fulham? But let's talk Manchester City first, Alison, and the manner of their performance. They are, of course, going for the quadruple, which we'll come on to in a moment. But just how impressive were they in the first game back after the international break?
Well, I think they surprised themselves how impressive they were, to be honest. You never know what you're going to get after an international break, do you? And Fulham didn't half help them, though. They went ahead early. Both goals came as a consequence of terrible mistakes by Fulham players. Admittedly, City, they're the best at capitalising on errors, and they did so with inch-perfect precision, as they do. But once they were 2-0 ahead, a sort of strange thing happened. The phrase in football is often, did the bigger team take their foot off the gas? They did. I don't think they did. It's just that it's as if the quadruple is sort of hovering over them like a halo, and they know if they're going to do that, they have to expend as little energy as possible. So there was no need for them. They had the game wrapped up. Fulham, they didn't have a shot on target. Didn't look like they were going to have a shot on target. They were competent after they'd gone 2-0 down, but they didn't look like they were going to threaten City. So City just played a sort of glide, I would say, sort of suffocating glide, which in itself is impressive because they don't need to make any more statements about being able to score 5 goals in a game. They've probably got the goal difference thing wrapped up now. It's almost more intimidating if you're Liverpool watching City almost visibly thinking about other trophies and how to make sure they've got enough for every fixture coming up. So that was the sense in which they were impressive rather than their performance after they'd capitalised on 2 crass mistakes.
Crossy, I've got to ask you this. Sergio Aguero, 228 goals in English football. He's got there 46 games quicker than Thierry Henry. Who's the better striker?
I think Thierry Henry. I think when we look upon...
Let me say that again. Sergio Aguero, 228 goals in English football. He's got there 46 games quicker than Thierry Henry. Who's the better striker?
Well, you're asking me a question. The stats are otherwise.
I agree with John.
I think the all-encompassing assets that Thierry Henry brought, in that basically he did... Please don't get me wrong, I think Aguero, when we look back upon...
They're both great players.
Brilliant players, but I just feel with Henry, he was more than just a goal scorer, not just saying that that's purely what Aguero is. By the way, what a quality to have in the modern game. But Henry would link the play more, be more dynamic. I think you can make a case for him the best foreign player ever to have played in the Premier League. I probably would make that case. Whereas I think Aguero will go down as absolutely one of the all-time greats. I know probably the next question is that basically does he get the kind of the credit that he deserves, which I think is another argument. I think, funnily enough, I think 3 months ago, when City were absolutely on fire, and this has been a thrilling title race. I'm sure it'll go down to the wire between City and Liverpool. I would have said make Aguero Player of the Year, And each and every time that this seems to happen for Aguero, which probably explains why, I can't begin to explain why I don't think he's ever made the PFA Team of the Year. That's a weird anomaly. But I do think that basically each and every time there seems to be another sort of kind of case for another player. And sure enough, I think in the last 3 months, Raheem Sterling has overtaken Aguero, I think, in those sort of kind of the claim to be Player of the Year. I think something must be wrong with football if Raheem Sterling doesn't get Player of the Year for what he's done, not just on the pitch but off the pitch. He's been an absolute incredible symbol for football and society this season and should be rewarded for it. But I also think, actually, funnily enough, Bernardo Silva has made a really strong case, and you could make a strong argument for Bernardo Silva almost having a better season than Aguero, because Aguero is so good, he's so reliable, so prolific, that we almost become used to and expect goals from Aguero. His finish yesterday was incredible. I mean, it was just, he burst between two players there. I mean, sometimes he almost looks, I wouldn't say slow, but you wonder what you're going to get from him. And you right off and dismiss his power and his speed and his pace and his energy as something or nothing, because you become used to it. Aguero's finish yesterday was sublime. It was incredible. He's such an important player. And if City win the league, it'll be such a huge part down to Aguero. But unfortunately, maybe you pay the penalty for playing in a team as good as Manchester City, because they are brilliant, in that basically you are going to be surrounded by other really good players as well.
Chase, how influential is media profile in these decisions? Because Thierry, if we go back to the Thierry Henry era, this time, just looking at the Sun here, this time back in 2005, he got a hat-trick against Norwich in an Arsenal shirt. But he would almost always talk to the media after games, always make himself available. If I think of the great Chelsea team under Mourinho, Frank Lampard, always. Yeah. It was a staple part of the post-match process, always making himself available. Raheem Sterling has now unquestionably got that confidence to talk after matches. We don't hear from Sergio Aguero. Does that make a difference when it comes to footballers voting for their own team of the year, their own player of the year, and also the Football Writers' Football of the Year?
Definitely for the football writers, 100%. And obviously, I think with the football writers as well, it's not just about what they do on the pitch. Obviously, the definition of the Footballer of the Year is an element of the conduct as well, isn't it? And generally, the precept of how they behave. For the footballers, I think it does as well. Yeah, I think you're right. I think they're consuming the media the same as everyone else. Obviously, they're playing against these players, so they've got a greater awareness of what they actually do on the pitch than we have, and obviously the importance. I think John's right. I think Aguero suffers because he is just so consistent, and he's done it year after year after year, whereas other players are having a sort of more peak and trough sort of approach, and somebody has a fantastic season. And often it has been a case of, I think, quite consistently, players have made more compelling cases in individual seasons than Aguero has. Over the period of his time at Manchester City, you would say it's astonishing that he hasn't been Footballer of the Year. But if you look at every individual year and take it as an isolated example, there are reasons why he's not done it. But to answer your question, yes, I agree. I think it is definitely an element of everyone's perception of players. Harry Kane at the moment massively benefits from the fact that we know he will speak to the media, not just because he's how the media behave towards him, but because of the general perception of him as somebody who is willing to talk, whose profile is raised because of that. If he scores a goal, he will talk about it afterwards. Therefore, there's more. He's on TV more, he's in the papers more, he's on the radio more, so there is general perception of him as being a more sort of high-profile figure. His impact is then greater or across the board. So, yeah, and Aguero, we know, doesn't do that. So he will suffer a little bit because, obviously, he speaks less and we don't see so much of him, so we only write about what he actually does on the pitch, which is obviously the main thing he does. But, yeah, there will definitely be either consciously or subconsciously a factor in the profile a player has.
Is that a deliberate strategy? The Henry, was that a strategy? Harry Kane, is that a strategy? We know Aguero's strategy, which is never to speak, really.
Yes.
Unless he's compelled to, or contractually obliged.
Well, players are advised, aren't they? And
I mean, it helps that they talk to us. I should make that clear.
Yes, it's very nice that they talk to us.
I think they should talk. I think it's daft they don't talk to us. So
it's great for their
there's no reason why they shouldn't talk to us.
Absolutely.
It's part of the process, and we want to hear from them because we've all got our opinions on various players. We can obviously write about various players, but I genuinely want to hear what they think about things. I'd love to hear much more from Aguero.
Don't you? You warm to a player. You admire and you sort of kind of respect the view of a Harry Kane, for example. Harry Kane, fantastic. I mean, he went to the Palace this week and got an honour, and he's always there. He's always talking, and I love the way he embraces that.
But what happens?
It's improved his profile.
But what tends to happen is
game.
a player, for whatever reason, if he's advised to, or it's just natural, and we'll never know for sure, but it's probably a combination, isn't it? Take Harry Kane, decides, I think it's the right thing to do. If I see all those press in the mix zone, I'm going to go over and say hello. And then nothing horrible happens as a consequence. So he thinks, I'll do it again. And then it becomes this effect of you get a player who knows it's not a terrible thing to talk to the media, and you can start having conversations, and you gradually get to know them better. They feel more comfortable in your company. Inevitably, the media will gravitate towards someone they know can string a sentence together and is prepared to talk and doesn't do so in a begrudging manner. And so you get players with a reputation for being media savvy. And all it is that, as you say, a relationship's been built. The player realises it's not horrible. It can be quite nice to have a chat and express your opinions and talk about your teammates. And sometimes the players that either speak English well or who are English do it on behalf of their teammates whose English is halting and they don't feel as comfortable. And so it goes that way. So it's a shame, in a sense, that more players don't look at the likes of Harry Kane and think, well, it's done him no harm at all, and look how well known he is. And you know, the fans know him as a person as well as a footballer, and that's mainly because he talks to the media. So it's interesting that not more players, instead of hiding behind the spokesman for a club, want to come out and say, I'm like this, actually. I can talk.
Yeah, OK. Well, we'll see Tottenham in action, of course, this afternoon, because they play Liverpool at Anfield. Now, we've had the privilege and the benefit of seeing Liverpool in their last Premier League game, which was their victory at Fulham. You saw them, Ali saw them yesterday, saw Manchester City beat Fulham. Was there an obvious difference between the two sides?
Oh, I think it is going to be incredibly...
Given that the opponents are the same.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, I think, to be honest with you, I think Fulham were equally hapless on both occasions. So I think what impressed me more about City is that I think, having come back from the international week, there is something psychologically with players going into that first game back. And I think it must be difficult for Pep Guardiola then to face the prospect of a Saturday lunchtime kick-off. Yes, I know people say, oh, don't be ridiculous, but I do think it makes a difference. And to that end, that's what caught my eye about City's performance yesterday. In the first 15, 20 minutes, they were absolutely dynamite. They were fabulous, straight out the blocks, passing, moving, wonderful performance. And once Aguero had scored the second, what was it, just after half an hour, they completely eased off because it was job done. They were on cruise control. What caught my eye about City also was that players didn't necessarily need to be at their best, but they looked strong and completely, unbeatable defensively. They had Sane on the bench. You know, Stones is back fit and on the bench. That's a big thing for them, in my view. I mean, all sorts. Fernandinho was on the bench. He's fit again. That strength in depth is a formidable, I think, weapon for City. I think Liverpool, when they went there, they played well. They obviously won the game. They were so much better than Fulham in that first half, but they were slightly guilty of easing off at 1-0, and Fulham came back quite well and levelled it up. And then, frankly, Liverpool got away with it with a really clumsy, stupid penalty to give away. I think they're so similar, on such a similar level at the moment, but I do think that City have just got a little bit more momentum, a little bit more about their play, and clearly they're a point ahead, same number of games played, and City make up their their game in hand against Cardiff on Wednesday. So it's going to go to the wire, but I do think City have slightly the edge at the moment.
Big game from this afternoon, Liverpool. It's a big game for Tottenham as well, because they're looking forward to Wednesday night against Crystal Palace in the opening of their stadium and the fanfare and the circus that will surround that. But this feels like another pivotal game.
It's probably, apart from, I'm trying to think Chelsea, but it's probably Liverpool's toughest game left, isn't it, really? And I think also for Tottenham, you know, they need to get a result today, because they've gone into the international break with 1 point from 12, I think, and it's going...
With nine defeats.
Yeah, and it's obviously going in the wrong direction at the moment for them. They need to arrest that slide, and I think it's a tough game for both of them. I'm not quite sure which way it'll go, clearly, but I think that, you know, that you're looking at that and thinking, if Liverpool get through this game this afternoon, you know, I think they will go down to the wire anyway, but they're probably looking at it thinking this is the toughest game they've got left. After the international break, they need to make a statement following on from Manchester City yesterday. I don't think playing Fulham is going to be sort of any indication as to which way this is going. I think what the indication will be with the Champions League. Yeah. I think when those Champions League games start, that's when we really will know who's going to win this title, because you've got Tottenham have got to play, Liverpool have got to play Tottenham 3 times. Sorry, so Manchester City have got to play Tottenham 3 times. It's going to be difficult for them to win all 3 of those games, you know, and so you think, well, you know, are they going to get through the Champions League tie and win the Premier League game as well? So you look at that, obviously Liverpool go to Porto, that's going to be easier, but still quite tough. So I think what does the Champions League start to take out of them at this stage of the season? I think that's the real key to who's going to win the title now. Yeah,
OK, big game this afternoon for Liverpool. They play Tottenham, of course, up at Anfield. OK. Next up, we're going to go to international football. We'll talk England in Montenegro and the disturbing events that unfolded in Podgorica. More on that coming next. Welcome back. A reminder of who's with us this morning: Jason Burt, Alison Rudd and John Cross. Let's just show you what's in the papers as well. Sunday Times this morning, front page of their sports section. It's just the job. Ole Gunnar Solskjær confirmed this week, new Manchester United manager with that 3-year contract, off to a winning start as the permanent manager, beating Watford yesterday at Old Trafford. But he's got some contract issues to settle as well. Legea, this is Paris Saint-Germain, £350,000 a week they're offering for Manchester United's goalkeeper. They need to sign him quickly. They need to decide on this man as well, Paul Pogba, Real love. Zinedine Zidane talking glowing terms about the Manchester United midfielder. Huddersfield Town, they're on their way down. Lost at Crystal Palace yesterday. They're the second team in Premier League history to be relegated before the clocks changed. The quad is on. Ali and John were both at this game at Craven Cottage to see Manchester City beat Fulham very, very comfortably. It was 2-0 yesterday. It could have been a lot more. Sunday Telegraph, Sam Wallace picking up on this story about Jimmy Greaves. The honour for him is well overdue in a week that Harry Kane picked up the MBE, Gareth Southgate, the OBE, but still no honours for Jimmy Greaves, one of the most successful English forwards of all time. We're going to talk about that in this part. But first up, let's talk about events in Montenegro in the week, John, because we were there. Jason was there. Yeah. Too. I'll hold my hands up right now. I didn't hear any racist abuse at any point during that game. I'm not disputing any versions and any of the allegations or any of the comments that have been subsequent or complaints that have subsequently been made. But could you explain how difficult that night was for us reporting on allegations and incidents that I know that you didn't hear until later on in that game, or towards the very end of it?
Well, listen, I've reported on many games, obviously hundreds, thousands, really. And unfortunately, very sad to say, I've reported on many where I've heard very loud racist abuse. And this game, bearing in mind the coverage that has followed afterwards, was a strange one, because during the game, like you, I just didn't hear anything. I didn't hear anything until, in my ears, and we're a long way back, the press box was a long way back in the main stand. So we're in the main stand looking down on the pitch. It's not the biggest ground by any means, but we're looking down. We're over the top of the 2 benches, sort of at the foot of on the sidelines of the pitch. And I did not hear anything until Danny Rose, who'd obviously, you know, understandably lost his head somewhat and flew into a tackle, which he got booked for, and then was on the receiving end of some, you know, horrendous monkey chant noises, which, you know, obviously then changed the way that I was reporting. I was just about to sort of file, literally pressing the button, quickly dressed in a couple of things for first time, first edition. And then I'm thinking, blimey, that was horrendous. But I was still oblivious to the fact of kind of just how bad it was during the game. The only thing that I'd been drawn attention to was early on, Ian Dennis, who's, you know, very, very good reporter and commentator for BBC, had referred to it early in his commentary, and I just didn't hear it. And he was saying along the lines of that basically, I hope what I think I've just heard wasn't racist abuse. I then checked with some of the journalists who were over in the overspill over the far side of the ground. That's where Danny Rose was playing. And I checked with some colleagues over there, and they hadn't heard anything. And indeed, funnily enough, afterwards, I checked with 3 separate people who were in the family and friends sort of kind of section of seating, which was very close to and behind the Montenegro bench. One said it was prevalent and you could hear some abuse right throughout the game. One said that they heard some whistling, but wasn't sure whether it was of a racist nature. The third said they didn't hear anything at all. It was a most bizarre thing. And then speaking to some of the players and reading their quotes afterwards, even Raheem Sterling said that he hadn't heard it, and obviously until the end, but Danny Rose had told him about it. And you know, he talked in a more general way. He talked in a much more supportive way of his teammates. But it somewhat frustrated me sometimes this week to hear kind of normally very well informed sort of experts talking about it as if it was this overwhelming night of shame where loads of players had been abused. It really wasn't like that. Under no circumstance am I disputing that what certain people said that they did hear it throughout the game. I heard it with my own ears right at the end of the game, but it was a very strange, surreal night. And I reproached myself afterwards thinking, blimey, have I really missed the story here? Because I didn't give it huge coverage because I just hadn't heard. You can only write what you can see and hear, and I hadn't heard it in time for that first edition. By the second edition, completely changed the tone, particularly on the back pages, and then gave it the reporting I thought, the coverage that it warranted, because if a player is racially abused, it should be reported, it should be shamed, and we should act upon it. But it was a strange night to report on.
But I don't think anyone could criticise you for not reporting or not giving it the publicity that you later gave it after listening to Gareth Southgate and some of the England players as well. How did Southgate handle the situation? Press comments afterwards, his demeanour, because he was pretty shocked, if not traumatised, by that experience.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, Neil. I think he was traumatised by it, but handled it superbly. He came out, he was very bold, he was very clear. He said that he'd heard it, which obviously from a reporting point of view takes it on another level when you've got the England manager confirming what we'd heard right at the end, and strengthens the story. But also I think changes the dynamic slightly. So I felt it was a situation where it could have been a bit messy. It could have been a bit like, well, how strong do we go with this? And I think England and the FA took control of that, all the players and Southgate took control of that situation in that moment. And Southgate couldn't have been stronger and also couldn't have been more reasonable, because he didn't come out in any sort of angry tirade about whatever. It was all very reasonable argument. It was very well thought through. He had a question right at the end from one of the Montenegrin media who were obviously quite upset by the whole occasion, and he dealt with that very politely but very firmly. And I think that it's what we've come to expect from Gareth Southgate, I thought, and it was exactly the right measured response from him. And then I was extremely impressed, as I have been for quite a long time, with the response from some of the players, and in particular Raheem Sterling, who again took control of the situation, and I think almost in an empowering way changed the dynamic to be, you know, a very forceful, like, well, we're just not going to accept this kind of scenario anymore. In the past, we've had kind of wishy-washy things and not quite sure what the response is going to be and let you wait for investigate and blah, blah, blah. These guys were prepared to come out and say, no, this is what happened, and we're not accepting this. And these are the sanctions that I think should happen, because suddenly the story becomes much more powerful and bigger, and I think has much more emphasis and much more sort of effect in the aftermath of it, because UEFA have got to take this one extremely seriously, because if they don't, there will be a backlash against them, and that backlash has been strengthened because of the response of Southgate and because of the response of the players on the evening.
We know the UEFA delegate did hear the...
And that helped as well, because Southgate told us that.
Yeah, he did. So you'd expect the punishment to be severe. What is appropriate, Ali? And do we have a solution in mind?
Well, I think it's important not to think of it in isolation as a one-off incident, and if you hurl empty stadiums at them or something, throw them out of competition, or it's almost irrelevant about the bigger picture about racism in sport. And it also gives a lot of people who haven't come to terms with themselves or their own behaviour, or clubs around the world, the way they view racism, it sort of lets them off the hook. It's all one country, a bit backward, haven't caught up with the rest of us. Let's throw the book at them, and then we've solved racism, haven't we? The best thing to come out of this is that it's made us think about racism across the world, and in particular in England, and we are not yet in a position to be pious or pompous about what other nations do. It's still a problem in this country. And so a lot of people have taken that discussion on board and wondered if, perhaps, if you hear racism at a ground in England, whether we might see, for the first time, players being marched off the pitch by their manager. Maybe that's a way of really underlining that racism is still prevalent. And as Jason said, the players are saying, this is unacceptable. I think the way forward is to take those decisions away from managers, first of all, and away from players. I think it's actually quite ridiculous to expect them to be going out, when you think of all the marginal gains in competitive sport at the highest level, that they've got to try and think about what they might do and what they've heard and whether they know what they've heard. I think that's ridiculous. You should have, every club and every nation should have people that are trained in crowd control and are positioned around grounds, and it's their specific job to listen for troublemakers and make sure that anyone starting a chant or individually being abusive is removed, identified. I also don't even think it should be the referee's job. I think it's really hard when you're refereeing a game. I can't imagine. I mean, I've done a bit of refereeing. I can't imagine running around trying to watch for those, was that tackle fair or not? At the same time, trying to listen to a noise and working out whether it was just natural abuse or racist abuse. Really difficult. So I think we need to think about globally how we tackle racism. You can't do it on the basis of, I think I heard something, and what do I do now?
Yeah, OK. Wise words, Ali. We'll see what punishments Montenegro get in May, but that's when the decision has been deferred to. I'd like to just move on and touch on Jimmy Greaves. It's a story that your paper has picked up with Sam Wallace this morning. It's about Jimmy Greaves and a request, a demand for recognition for the most prolific striker in history of English football, 44 goals for the national team as well. This comes in a week, of course, when Harry Kane received an MBE, Gareth Southgate an OBE, and Jimmy Greaves' son, Danny, talking about his father here, and saying he feels it's too late for recognition for his father.
Yeah, and sadly he's right, isn't he? I mean, not that it's too late, but if it happens now, it will have happened far too late in terms of, this should have been dealt with before. As we know, Jimmy Greaves was one of the greatest players England have ever had. He would have been in the 1966 World Cup team, but for illness. And it's strange in this country because we've kind of had this kind of period where we seem to have not reacted very quickly on things for a number of years, and now we are better. I think we're better in terms of recognising things and recognising people and recognising achievements. But for a long time, it was almost like, well, that they didn't sort of matter. And even the players who have been recognised after 1966 weren't for quite a long time. You'd think there was, I think it was into the 90s, wasn't it, before some of them actually received any sort of recognition. And it's a huge anomaly. A player of this stature, as loved as well as he was. I mean, he absolutely loved as a player, who resonates for so many people in terms of what he achieved and what he did in the game. And to sort of leave it this long, I think it's a real indictment of the authorities in the first place, in terms of the football authorities, that haven't sort of tried to remedy this. Unfortunately, it's probably something that will eventually happen, maybe posthumously, and that will be even sadder. But it is too late. But something still can happen. You know, they still can do something about it. And I think Sam's absolutely right to highlight that. And the comparison with Kane is correct. I mean, I think Harry Kane does deserve credit, absolutely. But it's quite premature to be giving him sort of gongs and so on. He's still midway through his career. He doesn't need to be recognised quite yet, and obviously we don't know what else he's going to go on to achieve. But I think something like Jimmy Greaves has been very sadly overlooked, and yeah, there's no excuse for it whatsoever.
No, sure.
I think we overlook just how important football is in society, and when we talk about the honours list, we have to make it, if we believe in that as a country and as a society. I've got mixed views on it myself. Then we absolutely have to embrace it in terms of what is relevant now to society. Football is such a place in society. That's why I agreed with Harry Kane and Gareth Southgate being recognised. I'd love to see Raheem Sterling, whose work on and off the pitch, be recognised, because he's so much more relevant to what young people are thinking about and getting that message out there than a lot of people who, you know, he's making a greater impact on the wider society. Similarly with Jimmy Greaves, in a week where I think we've examined ourselves a lot about kind of how we treat former players, particularly obviously in the wake of what's happened with the PFA, for example, who I think have been rightly absolutely criticised for their lack of action on dementia, for example, which, I mean, Dawn Astle, the work that she's done has been fantastic, highlighting that issue, reported brilliantly by another of your colleagues, Jeremy Wilson, I think, and making that such an agenda-setting issue. I do think we need to look at ourselves a little bit wider and make football is the lifeblood of it's our national sport. We have to make it relevant. For Jimmy Greaves to go this long without being recognised, I think is ridiculous.
OK, let's hope the authorities change their minds and commemorate his achievements sooner rather than later. OK, next up, we'll go back to the Premier League. We'll talk about the relegation battle. Huddersfield down after losing at Crystal Palace yesterday. OK, Huddersfield lost Crystal Palace yesterday. We're going to talk about them in a moment, but of course, next up after the Sunday supplement is Goals on Sunday. Let's find out what Ben and Cammy are up to. Ben.
Morning, Neil. Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Busy show for them, haven't we, Cam?
We have indeed.
Very much looking forward to our guest, Darren Moore, joining us, of course.
It's an exclusive. First time he spoke to anybody since his sacking at West Brom. Yeah,
so it'll be interesting to get his thoughts on what happened there. And also, of course, looking at Huddersfield, who've been relegated, sadly, from the Premier League.
Yeah.
You were there yesterday,
Dean Hoyle, the chairman. To be fair, it's been a fairy tale for them, hasn't it, really? 2 seasons. They crept up through the playoffs, and then last season was amazing, but this season, very difficult.
Sadly, it hasn't worked for them. So we're looking at those, and of course, all the other main talking points and goals from yesterday's Premier League action. So we'll see everybody at 11 o'clock.
Oh, we look forward to Goals on Sunday. It'll be a fascinating chat with Darren Moore coming up. Now, Jace, if you depend on your choice of newspaper this morning, so Mail on Sunday, the Quad's on, back of the Sunday People, Rail Love for Paul Pogba, David De Gea, in the Sun, Just the Job, Sunday Times, the Sun's goals pull out, all about Sergio Aguero, Sunday Mirror. You eventually find in the Observer that Huddersfield, they got relegated yesterday. It's a bit of a footnote. The Observer do give it due prominence. It's on the front page of their sports section this morning. Downtown, first team to be relegated this season, only the second team ever to be relegated before the end of March. Why are they missing from the rest of the newspapers? Do we just not care?
Well, I think there's 2 reasons why. One, there was inevitability about it anyway, and I think secondly, it's they are a smaller club, and I think this time of year in particular, we tend to concentrate on the bigger clubs, the top of the table rather than the bottom of the table. I don't think anyone expected them to stay up, and they were always sort of going to go down from quite early on this season, really. So I think people are probably just expecting it to happen, and it's a question of when rather than if. And we obviously look to see what people want to read and what people want to talk about the most, and we didn't start the show today with Huddersfield Town. We obviously start the show with...
I feel like a ping for me. That hurt.
I would have made the same editorial decision as you, Neil, don't worry. So, I mean, it's very... obviously, at the same time, it's obviously extremely... sad for Huddersfield, sad for the supporters, and I think with a club like Huddersfield, what's quite interesting is, you know, it's a difficult area in terms of the sort of economic impact of the area. They made a big thing of being in the Premier League. You go to Huddersfield and there are flags there and signs there saying we are Premier League, you know, we are the Yorkshire club. You want them to try and use this experience as an opportunity to come again, and that's what I hope for them. The danger is obviously you start to sort of go down after this, and we see that with lots of relegated clubs. I hope for their sake and the supporters' sake that they use it as an opportunity to bounce back. I was very disappointed when David Wagner left. I think you see the job through. I think that wasn't...
He bailed, didn't he?
I think so, and that sounds a little bit harsh, but I think you have a duty to see the job through when you've been there and you took the club up. And I thought I was disappointed with that. And at that moment, nobody thought they were going to save themselves. They probably weren't anyway. But I think if you're the manager of that football club, you have a duty to the club. Maybe there's something else going on and he felt he had to get out. But I think if there isn't, then you have a duty to the club to see that job through, and that job was to the end of the season.
Can they rebuild, Ellie? Have they got enough there to start again?
Well, you sort of feel they started rebuilding at the start of the season, that they couldn't quite believe they stayed up in their first season and then conclude... I mean, they were promoted on... Zero negative goal difference. I mean, they came up in a style that made it seem improbable they would get promoted, and then they stayed up with that same style. And you think, well, what do you do at that point? And you either think big, you buy big, you invest a lot of money, you go for it, or you think that was improbable, we're not going to do it a second time, let's start thinking about what we do over the next 5 years. So I think behind the scenes, another answer why it's not on the back page, many of the back pages, is because the club itself knew they were going down. This has not shocked anybody, it's not even shocked the boardroom. They've planned for it, so it will be very interesting, given that they've been level-headed and over-realistic, you might say, and not romantic, that they've been thinking about how they will cope with going back into the Championship and what their plan of action is there. How many... Do they think they make an immediate bounce back? Do they think it'll take 2 years, 3 years? Be interesting to see. They've kept the model the same. They've appointed a clone of Wagner and you know, with the sort of Dortmund connection. So it's as if they sort of know where they belong is probably doing quite well in the Championship, and they'll rebuild again, and maybe over the years they'll accumulate enough income that next time they're in the Premier League they will be able to buy a striker or two. One would hope.
What about another manager, a man universally known in the game as Scotty Parker?
Well, I mean... And
Fulham. Does he get the chance to bring Fulham back up, because they're heading down too?
Yeah, barring something very peculiar, they will go down. I think the will at the club is that they want to give it to him. It would be difficult to do so if he's yet to win a game, and if he doesn't do that between now and the end of the season, it will seem a bit strange, regardless of how highly regarded and popular he is. It's hard to keep that narrative going of we haven't got the points, but we're moving in the right direction. Right now, they haven't got the points, and they are moving in the right direction. They were depleted against Manchester City yesterday. They were without arguably their best players, I would say. The international break actually hit them hard. And there is an element of, do you take risks with players when you're playing Man City? Too many clubs decide they won't, which does affect the title race, actually. So I think they've probably got their sights full now on having got some very, very tough games out the way, in which they have acquitted themselves overall. They've acquitted themselves well, and given their defence has been very porous and sometimes embarrassing, they haven't looked like they're about to be that embarrassing again. And that's how you build, isn't it? And Scott Parker says the right things. He says he wants to build on a Fulham identity. He wants to build a connection with the fans. He wants people to come to Fulham, enjoy what they see, but with an element of just being a bit more grown up about how they approach tactically the matches. So I think if he can just get a few wins between now and the end of the season, that might just be, and a few draws, that might be enough for the club to be able to say, yeah, we know you took over at a difficult time, but we know you, we like you, you're ambitious, you're a former player, you love the club, you've got experience with bigger clubs, you're popular with the media, the players like you, let's go for it.
Yeah, OK. Well, he's running out of time. He's got 6 games to get off the mark. Cardiff have got 8. They play Chelsea this afternoon. Now, in your trailblazing, groundbreaking column, which started the week before last, there was a line in there about Neil Warnock and the potential you thought for him to call it a day at the end of this season. Why do you think he might walk away, John? And how significant an achievement would it be for Warnock if he kept Cardiff in the Premier League?
Well, there's a few things in play there, in that I think he brought up a pretty damn average championship team into the Premier League and hasn't really had the opportunity. I think probably because they had their fingers burnt last time, maybe the club felt making wrong signings and you know, financial losses, that basically he's been left with largely the same group of players, the same championship squad, which by rights I thought should have been in the lower end of the championship because that's what the budget was. If he keeps them up this season, that will, in my view, make him one of the 3 contenders for manager of the season. I mean, it would be an incredible achievement. Now, all of a sudden...
Scotty Parker over there.
But it's just...
Depends who wins the league, I think.
Well, yeah. I mean, listen, there will be huge cases for Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp. Sure. We know that. But I think at the other end of the scale, Neil Warnock, if he can somehow keep Cardiff up, and listen, the odds are against them now, aren't they? Because Burnley's win was massive. They're 5 points adrift, yes, albeit they've got a game in hand which they play today. But if Neil Warnock can do that job of work, then I think after all the drama and everything, the heartbreak and the terrible tragedy that has surrounded Emiliano Sala, I think for a man of his age, into his 70s now, it's just been an incredibly draining experience. And while I think he would deserve incredible plaudits for keeping them up, I do think that it would leave him in a place where I think, well, I've achieved my ambitions, I've achieved the impossible of keeping Cardiff up, and then also I've done what I hadn't done before, which was keep a team in the Premier League. And I think he would decide to call it a day and walk away.
Sure.
I think it would be an amazing achievement if he does it.
OK, it would be an amazing achievement if they beat Chelsea this afternoon, a big fixture for Neil Warnock and his Cardiff side. OK, next up, we're going to test the guests' League One knowledge. It's the Chequers Trade Trophy this afternoon at Wembley Stadium. More on that game. It's coming next. Welcome back. Everyone's very confident about the Chequers Trade Trophy because this table's been talking about Mother's Day for the last 3 or 4 minutes. Normally at this point, people are scrambling through papers, looking up teams, looking up the
scrambling, actually, to be fair.
You did, didn't you? You left TLH with a nice cup of tea this morning, didn't you?
Absolutely, present, yeah, so.
Can't forget Mother's Day. What's happening in the Chequers Trade Trophy this afternoon? Portsmouth Sunderland, we saw amazing scenes, amazing images last night in London, didn't we? Trafalgar Square, thousands and thousands of Sunderland supporters had made their way south the day before the game, clearly determined to enjoy the occasion and the weekend. But when we think of where those 2 respective clubs are and what they have achieved in the past, it's extraordinary that they find themselves playing in this afternoon's Chequers Trade Trophy at Wembley. Yeah,
it did make me laugh, actually, seeing those, because everyone loves Sunderland fans because of the journey they go through, the pain and heartbreak, which it seems that sort of an annual basis, either or up or down, and indeed, you know, obviously chasing promotion, you know, probably through the playoffs this season. Jack Ross is doing a very, very good job there, by the way. But everyone loves a Sunderland fan. But if it were Leeds in Trafalgar Square, I wonder what our reaction would be then, really. But it just seems like a completely different atmosphere about it, a sort of a carnival atmosphere that basically I think is embodied by 2 absolute sort of sleeping giants, and people quick to forget just how big Portsmouth are, by the way. I mean, we read on a regular basis incredible gates of 30, 40,000 that Sunderland get on a regular basis. But this is a fantastic, I think, advert for the checker trade. And the competition, if I can just take that on as a start, really, has obviously come in for some criticism and for some... I guess some clubs, particularly the big clubs, obviously, we're talking about, have sort of decided not to go with it. Some have embraced it. But I actually think that yes, clearly sort of the fielding the teams, whether you've got the sort of squad depth and punishments and those sort of things, have caught some negative attraction. But the Football League are trying to be innovative here and sort of trying to make things work. And at the end of the day, they've left themselves with a real showpiece final of two clubs, you know, getting results and taking the competition really seriously and giving their fans a day out at Wembley, which they will remember and enjoy for a long, long time. Well, I guess if they win. But it's a really good, I think, opportunity there for two teams, sort of both chasing promotion, both going really well, but both absolutely determined to enjoy this day. So I actually think the Football League, the two clubs and the checker trade get some decent respect here. Yeah,
huge afternoon here.
I'm relieved it's two first teams that are in the final, to be honest with you. I think it could have been a little bit awkward if it wasn't two sort of, you know, teams who are going to field their strongest teams in it. And obviously, yeah, it will be a huge afternoon. I think what I like about this sort of story is, you know, it's again an example of how adversity brings out the best in fans. You know, these two clubs have been through so much, and it's almost like you kind of wear that as, like, not a badge of honour, but you kind of thrive on that. You think, well, these are the times to really get behind your club. You see that before with various other clubs as well, where the gates you get, the attendances you get in this country are extraordinary going down the league. They're absolutely amazing. You know, it doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. And you're seeing clubs like this where people are almost thinking, like, I want to be there for this bad time. So then I can say in 5 or 10 years' time, hopefully, we'll be into the good times. I was there when it turned around. I was there when it started. And these are the times to get behind your club. And that's why I think they deserve huge amounts of credit, the supporters of both clubs. And those scenes last night were fantastic. You know, it was reminiscent of the 1950s when, you know, teams would come down for the FA Cup final and so on. I thought it was brilliant. And it's just, obviously, you see the kind of the want a bit of success to hold on to and then try and be there for that journey back to the top. Yeah,
amazing support that they have, both teams have this afternoon.
Yeah, and it is interesting, actually, because they're both clubs who are hopeful for promotion, and there are bigger clubs higher up in the pyramid who would put out a B team for the FA Cup, which is the established trophy in this country, and put league position before a cup. And these are two clubs that need promotion, and yet they've been putting out strong teams and giving a lot of effort in a trophy that no one ever remembers who's won it. Let's face it. But it's, you know, it's not got glamour attached to it, and yet they've found a way of making it. Maybe they're two clubs that really needed to connect with the fans and give them something back. Like you were saying, Jason, I mean, they're there through the bad times and they're well supported. I don't know what you can give them if you can't give them a trip to Wembley. Give them a trip to Wembley.
Yeah, OK. Interesting afternoon at Wembley Stadium, for sure. The Checker Trade Trophy final between Portsmouth and Sunderland. OK, sadly, we're out of time on the Sunday supplement this morning. Thanks very much to Jason, to Ali and to John for their company this morning. Good to see you. OK, don't forget you can download the podcast from all the usual places. You can catch up with the show. It's on demand. We're back next Sunday, the later time of 10:30. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Sky Sports. Feel it all.